District of Conservation is sponsored by the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, better known as CFACT. To learn more about our sponsor, head over to cfact.org. Thanks for listening to the program.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
Welcome to District of Conservation. I am your host, Gabriella Hoffman. This podcast offers a sober examination into all things hunting, fishing, shooting sports, energy, environment, and the public policy surrounding it. And this podcast also specializes in original interviews that you won't hear elsewhere. Here's what I have for you today. Delighted to welcome back Mark Oliva from National Shooting Sports Foundation onto the podcast and also simultaneous video broadcast. Mark, good to talk to you. I know it's been very busy with a lot of executive actions, new direction in Washington, of course, Safari Club, your guys' SHOT Show, lots of stuff going on. So it's wonderful to catch up. I wanted my listeners to know what's happening on the firearms front because that's kind of taken a backseat, but a lot is happening. So happy to have you give us an update.
Gabriella, it's so good to be back. I appreciate it, and it's great to see you again. Yeah, it has been a busy first month of the presidency, right? And it's been a busy month or a little bit longer than that for those of us in the firearms space, and then folks who are working also in the conservation space that we overlap with. So it's been pretty exciting these past few weeks.
What is NSSF's initial preening into kind of the new changes are? Is it vastly different than Deb Haaland's, interior? Are you optimistic about a Burgum-led interior in terms of elevating the voice of sportsmen, not restricting shooting sports access on public lands? What is your initial preening so far into the new administration interior?
Yeah, I would say from NSSF's point of view, we're very encouraged. We're supportive of Secretary Burgum taking his post. We're very excited to see him there. He's of course an outdoorsman. He's been a hunter. He's grown up with the outdoors lifestyle from North Dakota, and it's obviously one of his first actions coming in is said that he wants to take a look at all the regulations and make sure that he's not limiting access for outdoorsmen and women to be able to get outside and be able to enjoy their hunting and shooting traditions. And then part and parcel of that also is we saw that this past week that the president has nominated Mr. Nesvik from Wyoming to be the next U.S. Fish and Wildlife Director. So obviously he comes from a law enforcement background, which we think is probably pretty important, and also that he grew up as a game warden. I mean, he spent an entire career in Wyoming, not just as a hunter and outdoorsman, but also helping to police and making sure that the outdoors that we're able to enjoy are able to be perpetuated for the future. So it's exciting to see him be nominated for that role at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
It's a good nomination. I remember citing his testimony. I think it was about grizzlies, and he's really good about Endangered Species Act reforms and putting that law back into its original intent. So it's good to have someone who's connected to wildlife conservation actually at the helm of it, who's a voice for sportsmen and women. And even the Bureau of Land Management director nominee, I've heard some good things about her. She believes in multiple use, including recreation. So I think she's going to steer the agency, should she get confirmed, in a more positive direction away from what Tracy Stone Manning was doing, alienating sportsmen too, in addition to the others.
Gabriella, I would agree with that. I mean, I think what we saw from the previous administration was there was an attempt to lock outdoorsmen and women outside of the sphere of what it meant to be a conservationist. And I think it's important. I think many of your listeners understand it, but to make sure that they understand the difference between a conservationist and a preservationist. And I think that what we're seeing now are people who are nominated for these roles and taking their position in the government who understand that, hunters and recreational outdoorsmen and women have a role, and we certainly have a place to fulfill in this whole chain of events that happens to make sure that we have sustainable wildlife for the future. And that is, incumbent upon us as voters to make sure we continue to vote for people like that. But we're seeing what that has brought forward. Now we're getting people who understand that role and are going to make sure that they're providing that access. These are public lands. These belong to you and I, and we've been shut out of them, or we've been able to have. We've seen actually with the previous administration there was increased access, but there was limited ability to use certain types of ammunition, which was kind of what I call a little bit of a devil's deal, and with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It was a little bit of a bait and switch. Hey, we'll give you more access, but you can't use traditional ammunition anymore. But they didn't have any of the science to back up behind that. So I'm encouraged to see someone like Secretary Burgum come in. I'm encouraged to see Mr. Nesmith and his nomination, because these are people who have spent entire careers based in science, understand what that role is, and making sure that they're making decisions at the local levels that are best suited to that. Some of these rules that we saw coming out from the previous administration were saying that you couldn't use traditional lead ammunition or fishing tackle that had lead in it in some of the eastern national wildlife refuges because of condors in California. The last time I checked, I live in Virginia. There's no condors flying over Virginia. There haven't been, I would venture to say, for probably centuries, maybe eons. And, so it's not really an issue here. So we're encouraged by these developments.
Right. I think a lot of that guidance was very misplaced, and we've talked about this at length in the past, but any of the studies that have come out about blood alcohol content or blood content from lead tackle ammunition, it's very minuscule. I remember we've talked about the North Dakota NIH study from 2008, and the ones that have been done extensively have shown that it's really inconclusive to say you're worse off using lead tackle, and people still and bullets. People still tend to lean towards that because they're cheaper, they're functional. And until, like you have said, the industry sees anything indicating they have to reverse course, they're not going to change it, because it's a very big component of the firearms industry. It employs a lot of people, and they want to be safe and responsible. And I think even we've talked about this before, but the Toxic Substances Act, I think a court even said that you can't use that as a justification to ban lead tackle and ammunition. Bureaucrats can't do that. So the rule that they were creating, these phase outs, I think might be challenged in the future. Maybe if Congress has an appetite to codify, the distinction there and say, like, unless it leans on science, the EPA can't create guidance in this respect, which would then affect the functions of Interior. But related to Interior, of course, is conservation funding. Everyone who listens to the show is familiar that there's a connection between shooting sports largely and hunting and fishing, and funding mechanisms through Pittman-Robertson, largely for the hunting and shooting sports side, and Dingell-Johnson for fishing and boating. Before the new administration took over, the numbers came out in terms of conservation funding. That's already grandfathered, and that's not changing. A lot of people were worried that because of President Trump's freezing of federal programs, this would affect conservation funding. What has NSSF found out about that? Is funding affected? It's not affected? What can you assure my listeners there?
Yeah, I think it's important people understand that this is truly one of those very few lockboxes that exists on Capitol Hill, that the money that is paid by firearm ammunition makers, who they pay that excise tax in. Of course, that's passed along in a cost to you and I when we go purchase our next firearm or purchase our next box of ammunition. But they pay that tax in. That goes to the U.S. Treasury, and that is apportioned off to the side for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for them to apportion to the states by a pretty complicated formula. But that money is truly in a lockbox. In 1937, Pittman-Robertson got together and they made sure that they had this, safely locked up for conservation in America. So that money is still continuing to be set aside in that account. That's still going to be allocated back to the states. That happened already this past year before the new administration came in. We expect that nothing is going to be interrupted with that. So we think that a lot of those, people who may be concerned about, some of these, upheaval times that are happening on Capitol Hill, and this itself, the Pittman-Robertson Fund is going to be safe from any kind of intrusion that anyone might be worried about. So we'll continue to see dollars go toward conservation. That money is dedicated strictly for conservation. They can't use it to fix roads. They can't use it to fix Medicaid. They can't use it for the DOD to spend on their next programs. This is money that's all strictly set aside for conservation.
I'd heard in Colorado, though, when they combined the two agencies into the Parks and Wildlife, that some of those monies are not going to true conservation practices. So I would hope that perhaps with Burgum now at the helm and hopefully incoming director Nesvik at Fish and Wildlife Service, he can remind these kind of, let's say, resistant type of agencies to follow the mission statement and to not, toy around with those monies.
Yeah, so that's actually set aside by law. So it'd be interesting. I have to look into what Colorado may be doing, but probably one of the most visible things that we're able to show people is when we do these bear den studies, and we go show them that all the serums on these bear den studies, the telemetry, the radio collars, everything that's used to do this is coming out of Pittman-Robertson dollars. Yep. All the studies that are going into this, the computer systems that are being brought to bear to track these over some of these bears are over 20 years at a time. So that is all money that's strictly set aside. So you can't use it for, hey, I need to go get a lawnmower for the local park service. That's not applicable. There are some requested changes from U.S. Fish and Wildlife that they'd be able to expand the use of some of those dollars to include, vehicles that they need to get out to the woods to be able to see what's happening with the wildlife, to be able to conduct the surveys that they need. So there are some things that are going on with that, but the use of those dollars is strictly governed by federal law. So if there are states that may be, tinkering around with that would be a serious concern for U.S. Fish and Wildlife. They jealously guard how that money is being used, and those grants that they, go down, the reports that come back from those states, they're going through those every year to make sure that money is being spent the way it is. So it would be very unfortunate if there were states that were trying to, skirt the edges on how that money is supposed to be used.
It absolutely would. And relatedly, Mark, I want you to talk about President Trump's executive order about gun violence. I think it's to undo his predecessor's machinations. And then I also want you to kind of give a lay of the land of what's happening with ATF, because I have not heard any news yet of a potential director. Yeah. Is he going to do away with the agency? So what's happening on the firearms regulation front?
Yeah, so I think probably everyone saw that about a week or so ago, the president put out an executive order to the attorney general to have her go through and look at any, in his words, were infringements upon the Second Amendment rights of both you and I. So that he wants to be able to examine everything that's been going on with the previous administration. So we think that Attorney General Bondi will take a close look at some of the things that we saw that were promulgated out of the ATF under the previous administration, to include things like the engaged in the business rule, which we think is unconstitutional. I think that you're going to see a review of the pistol brace rule, the frame and receiver rule. I think you're going to see some of these other rules that have been promulgated out. They're going to be reviewed. In fact, what we've already seen just past week at the Fifth Circuit and at the 11th Circuit, there were cases that the ATF and Department of Justice was appealing because they didn't like the rulings on that they got in the lower federal courts. They've actually asked those courts, the 11th Circuit and the Fifth Circuit, to both they put in motions to pause, basically, is what they want. Motion to postpone oral arguments until after AG Bondi is able to put out any guidance and directives issue, which chooses to, because that may negate anything that they're doing. So some of the stuff may be fixed by executive action, which we know isn't always a perfect fix. People want to see things fixed in law, but it's much easier and quicker to get things done by executive action and then pursue a law change down the road, because that sometimes can take, as we see, if anyone who watches Capitol Hill, some guys take decades to get enough support behind a piece of legislation to move through. So we're going to see that directive come out from AG Bondi, I would think, probably within a couple months, and I think that we'll start to see some of these rules that were promulgated that are very problematic and are very overreaching on behalf of ATF. I think we'll see those pulled back, and I think we'll see those fixed. As far as ATF director, I've heard a lot of rumors, just like everybody else, but we haven't seen any nomination. I take some of those rumors with a grain of salt. Mm-hmm. I think really what from Mark's point of view, and this is strictly Mark's point of view, I think that the president wanted to make sure that he had his attorney general confirmed, which obviously he has. Todd Blanche has been nominated to be the deputy attorney general, and that confirmation process is going through. But I think he wanted to have those two pieces in place before he wants to nominate a next director, because, of course, the director of the ATF reports to the deputy attorney general of the United States. So we want to make sure he has those two pieces in place before a nomination comes forward. There's been a lot of talk, and there's even been pieces of legislation that have been introduced to abolish the ATF. I think it's important that people understand that even if you got rid of the ATF tomorrow, even if all that went away, the laws still exist. So someone has to execute those laws. And then you got to start to ask yourself, well, who would execute those laws? They would either come down to the FBI, or it would come down to Homeland Security through HSI, which I would warn people that both of those agencies are probably not the best equipped to handle the regulatory mission of the ATF. The ATF has, of course, a law enforcement mission and a regulatory mission. If you had, FBI and HSI looking behind the gun counter of every retailer, I think that they would, their natural instinct would be to see a potential terrorist behind every gun counter. So that's not exactly who we want there. We've already had some discussions with ATF leadership. We've already talked to them about some of our concerns with the previous administration. They've talked to us about some of the concerns that they have. And we're confident that we continue to work this relationship through. I don't think the ATF is going to go away. The ATF has a role. I think it's going to be there. We want to ensure that the ATF does their job. And their ATF's job is to make sure that we are not seeing firearms illegally trafficked throughout the United States. And that is an important role to make sure that those people who are criminally and illegally using firearms, misusing those firearms, are held to account. And that's what the ATF should be focused on. And they should also be focused on helping the firearm industry, helping those retailers, helping the manufacturers stay within the laws and the regulations. So we're looking forward to seeing that relationship kind of be restored, because it's been damaged over the past few years, and it's been unfortunate to see. And I think it's not just something that we feel on our side. I think that there are many on the other side of this within the ATF who understand that there needs to be that cooperative role. Most of the tips for illegal firearms trafficking, for illegal straw purchasing of firearms, start right there at the gun counter. And it's those small mom and pop gun shop owners who see something that just doesn't seem right, and they're the ones calling the local ATF field office and saying, "Hey, I've got something here that doesn't feel right, and I need you to take a look at it." So I think we're very confident that the president is taking his time to ensure he's going to choose the right man or woman for the job, and he's going to be thoughtful about it. Of course, here at NSSF, we don't endorse any particular candidate. We don't come out. The only time we've ever taken a position on a nomination was when David Chipman was nominated, of course, because that nomination was so egregious. This individual, of course, was a lobbyist for a gun control organization. Yeah. So it was so egregious to us, we had to say something about that. And we of course, opposed that nomination before it was eventually withdrawn. But we don't take a position on any of these. I know you've seen some of the other Second Amendment groups take some positions on who they would like to see. We don't. We will let the process play out. We make sure that we maintain that professional relationship with whomever we have to. As many of the things that we did not like out of the last administration, we still made sure that we had a professional relationship with Director Denebach and with the others, as many of the things that came out that we just didn't really like. But we need to make sure we had that relationship going forward. So we're looking forward to having an even better, more positive relationship, because we think that some of these changes we're going to start to see are going to come directly from Attorney General Bondi's desk when she starts to publish some new directives and orders.
What are some of NSSF's legislative priorities? I know perennially we always talk about suppressor reforms, making it easier. There have been some steps surprisingly taken to make it easier to obtain a suppressor. I'm hoping those changes are going to come more to light. But what else is NSSF focused on advancing, in addition to suppressors, of course?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing, and this is not a sexy thing for a lot of people to think about when it comes to the fire ministry, is one of our biggest issues has been debanking. So we're actually very heavy into the Fair Access to Banking Act that's been put forth both in the House by Congressman Barr and in the Senate by Senator Kramer. We want to really see that go. We've seen hearings already by Senator Scott, who's chair of the Banking Committee in the Senate, to talk about these issues. You've seen that he was able to extract some commitments out of the Fed chair to say that he would ensure that nothing would come out of the Fed chair that would kind of foster an Operation Choke Point 2.0, which is what we saw in the last administration. Operation Choke Point had gone away, but then it kind of become privatized, where you had federal agencies who were kind of leaning on the bank saying, "We're not telling you to do this, but if you did it, it'd be great." And so we're seeing that firearm manufacturers, retailers, ranges were seeing that they weren't able to access all the banking services that they needed to be able to have their business, thrive, because they were politically disfavored by many of these banking executives. So we've brought this forward to your big banks, to Citibank, to JP Morgan Chase, to Wells Fargo, to JP, I think ours is JP Morgan Chase, but to the big four, we've talked to them, that we've told them that this is an issue. We've been telling them for years. Of course, we've been supporting the Fair Access to Banking Act in the last Congress and the previous Congress before that. But I think that we may see some traction on that. Obviously, one of the very first things that President Trump did was when he went to the World Economic Forum, he turned to the banking leaders and he told them, he said, "I see what you've been doing, and it's wrong. You need to cut it out." So I think we're going to see a lot of pressure coming from not just the White House, but also from Congress to fix this. And we're very hopeful that maybe we can get something into law that says that if you have a lawful business, you cannot deny them, services based on quote unquote reputational risk. And that's not just our industry. It's obviously, we've seen crypto kind of take some of the lead on this as well. We've seen some of the other industries that have been suffering under this. Yeah, but so we're very, very hopeful that maybe we can get something across the line on that. That's, like I said, probably not the sexy thing that people want to hear. People want to hear about things being deregulated. We are supporting the Hearing Protection Act, which has been introduced in both the House and the Senate. I think there's actually several versions of the Hearing Protection Act out there already. But, those kind of bills that obviously we would love to see the suppressors come off the national, or from the National Firearms Act, so they could be deregulated. Of course, in some European countries, you're able to buy these at a hardware store. It is simply an accessory to a firearm. There are things that we would like to see make easier about it. Some of those issues, access issues, the protecting access for hunters and anglers Act has been introduced both in the House and the Senate. In the House by Congressman Whitman out of Virginia, and in the Senate by Senator Steve Daines. They're both introducing that bill again this year, and that of course would fight some of the things that we saw happening at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where they're opening up new national wildlife refuges for hunting and fishing access, but they were eliminating the ability for you to use lead ammunition, which we see was a way that they were trying to cleave off hunters and anglers from conservation in a couple of ways. Well, one, if they could raise the price of what it's going to cost to be able to shoot ammunition, the alternative ammunition is sometimes 3 to 5 times more expensive than traditional lead ammunition. But if there's not sound science to say you need to do that, then that's unnecessary, because we see that as a way that you're going to start to push out Joe Sixpack, who maybe only has a couple of days to hunt, in a month. Doesn't have a lot of time or money to be able to get out there with his kids and be able to teach them his traditions or her traditions and be able to kind of enjoy that. So, but also in that, you're going to start to impact the money that's going to be going back to conservation, because when you're buying less ammunition, well, now that conservation dollar starts to shrink. That's going back, and we're very concerned about that. The firearm and ammunition industry is carrying the overwhelming weight of conservation dollars going back to the states for these projects. For over $1 billion that was given back to the states last year, I think it was close to like 880 million of that was directly sourced back to firearms and ammunition. So we're very proud to show that. And by far, the biggest of that is ammunition. And I remind people, it's really the recreational shooter. It is the person who's going to the range, or who's going to go to the indoor range and shoot their handguns, or go out to the clays course and shoot a clays course. They're the ones who are really carrying the weight for hunters and anglers who are trying to get out there and enjoy outdoor recreation. And actually, the surveys that we've done, well up to almost, I think, over 80% of those recreational shooters who will never go into the woods, never go into the marshes, said that they were absolutely fine knowing that their dollars were going to support conservation for something that they may never take part in, but they knew that it was doing something good. So we're really proud of the firearm owning community, the recreational shooters who are very proudly supporting this, and the manufacturers who are very proud to pay this tax. And I think a lot of people would say that, why would the industry want this tax? Well, it's been there, and we know that it's doing good. And it's because the foresight that was there back in 1937, that you and I can enjoy the really abundant wildlife. The wildlife that we enjoy in North America, particularly in the United States, it is the envy of the world. And people just don't understand sometimes when they go outside of this bubble, that they look at what we're able to have here in North America, and particularly in the United States, and be able to enjoy it the way we do.
That's absolutely true. And hopefully we won't see any iteration of the Return Act come about to divorce the excise taxes from conservation funding, because that seems like a very out of left field thing. Because as you said, the surveys that NSSF has conducted with, I think, Southwick Associates and others, it shows that as more and more people learn about it, they have a pretty high approval, because they know that those monies are being stewarded. And through the efforts of NSSF and other groups, I think, doesn't Pittman-Robertson now include funding for public target shooting ranges? So anytime you shoot on public lands, you're benefiting from PR dollars paid by excise taxes. Yeah,
we actually were successful. It took us 11 years and 14 different pieces of legislation to get that bill through to where we changed the formula from a 10% federal match to 25% federal match, and we increased the number of years that states had to complete a project before they had to give up the funding. So it's been very beneficial. We've seen a lot of states really hop onto this and start to get very motivated about using those dollars that are available to start these projects. And a piece of legislation that was signed at the end of the last administration, and this is one of those evidences when they say Congress doesn't work. Well, there was a bill that was passed through that said that every forestry district and every district of Bureau of Land Management that didn't have a public range within a certain X number of miles, they would be required to construct a range on those districts so that people who wanted to go shoot on their public land, this is particularly important for people out in the western states, huge pieces of public land, of BLM land that they want to be able to access, and we want them to be able to access and shoot recreationally and have fun. We also don't want them to trash the place. We want them to make sure that they're doing it safely. So now this piece of legislation has authorized them to start to build shooting ranges on those districts, so people have a place to go to be able to shoot safely and cleanly, be able to make sure that they're not, trashing the place, and that we're able to do this in a safe manner, and to encourage people to continue to participate in the shooting sports, but do it in a responsible way that's also getting them out there on their public land. So we're pretty excited about that.
What else is NSSF prioritizing this year that might not be legislative? There's wonderful campaigns we've highlighted here before, but feel free to plug those in. Of course, partner with a payer. Any shooting initiative, Let's Go Shooting. I know National Shooting Sports Month. It's going to be nice to have an administration that recognizes that this year. But what else is kind of in the viewscape for NSSF this year?
Yeah, so I think it's important is again, we'll have National Shooting Sports Month again in August, and in the previous Trump administration, the president recognized that and wrote proclamations for it. So we're excited that to see those maybe come back with him. We expect that there's no reason that they wouldn't. We're a full year. Obviously, we just got done with SHOT Show. A lot of innovations from the industry out there, so we're expecting people to be pretty excited as the year goes on. There are a couple things on my front that I work on particularly in what we call our Real Solutions Safer Communities campaign, as we do outreach to make sure that people understand, especially those people in decision-making roles, understand what the firearm industry is doing for firearm safety. And I think probably one of the things that we started last year, and we'll continue to push it through this year, is 2 weeks throughout the year, as we designated as Gun Storage Check Week. And we're trying to get people who are gun owners to make sure that they're doing a check on how they are storing their firearms in their homes. The Heller decision, of course, told Dick Heller he couldn't tell you how to store your guns in the home. We see a lot of states are still passing laws anyway, dictating how people have to store their guns in the home. And we're not trying to tell people how they have to store their guns in the home. We're just reminding people that as a responsible gun owner, you have a responsibility to make sure that any firearm that's not in use is inaccessible to anyone who should never have their hands on it to begin with. That includes a small child, that could be a prohibited individual, or that could be someone who's suffering through a mental health crisis. So we're asking people twice throughout the year, and we take this 1 week in particular to assess your storage needs. My storage needs when I was a single guy were much different than after I got married and then started to have kids. Then as my kids got older, my storage needs changed even then. And then as my kids moved out of the house, and now I've got grandchildren who come to my house, now my storage needs are again much different. So I've had to assess my storage needs as time has gone on. Someone who's living by themselves, single, maybe having a digital storage safe might be good. And if there's one handgun, two handguns, they can quickly access that. Maybe that locking device that comes with the gun itself in the case, maybe that's going to be what's going to be good for you to make sure it's inaccessible and inoperative while it's not being used. But maybe if you have multiple firearms, maybe then you start to look at traditional upright safes, or maybe you look at a bigger locking safe like a desk safe. So we want people to make sure that they're assessing their needs and how they're going to do that, and to remind people that you do have a responsibility as a gun owner to make sure that every firearm that's not being used is inaccessible and unreachable to anyone who shouldn't have their hands on it. We don't want to see these tragedies happen. When we see stories of small children getting hurt or even killed because of firearm that was unattended, it was not properly stored, that breaks our heart too. So we're trying to make sure we do our part. So that'll probably be one of our big pushes again throughout the year. We'll do some stuff with Police Week again this year. We'll do some outreach as we start to get closer for Let's Go Hunting and Let's Go Shooting again to make sure we're trying to encourage people to get back out there and shoot. But I'm telling you, the year flies by. It moves very quickly. All of a sudden you'll turn the page and we're already back into planning for SHOT Show. And here's a little secret: we've already started planning for SHOT Show next year. It starts even while SHOT Show is happening. So, we're excited for what's happening in the industry. There was a lot of buzz, a lot of excitement at SHOT Show this year. We're at 66 months consecutive of over 1 million background checks, adjusted background checks for the sale of a firearm at retail. And we know that's not capturing every firearm sale, because there are states that if you have an active concealed carry permit, you don't need to run it through the FBI. So we don't capture those numbers. But we're excited about it. We see that people coming out by the millions to exercise their Second Amendment rights each and every month, and we think that there's a continued appetite. We think that the economy is playing kind of a little bit of a headwind against some of that. People don't have as much disposable income, so I think as we all hope to see the economy improve, that maybe we'll start to see people be able to invest in their Second Amendment rights as well. So it's an exciting year ahead of us. I think we have a lot of things on the horizon. As good as things might seem in the federal government, we have a lot of challenges in the states. Of course, I live in Virginia. I know you're not unfamiliar with this. We have a very challenging assembly that we're working with, and we're very thankful to have Governor Youngkin at the helm. But it's also something that we have to be very concerned about in the coming years, as we all have elections. So we have office cycle elections coming up. Colorado right now has been a very big challenge with their bid to try to ban every semi-automatic firearm that can accept a detachable magazine, and we've been working to fight against that. Washington it's just rolling out terrible gun control laws. California seems to do it. New York seems to do it. Rhode Island's already rolled out their budget plan proposal, and that includes a ban on modern sporting rifles. We're seeing some initiatives in Massachusetts that may want to go down the road to require microstamping, or we're trying to show them that this is not a workable technology, that this doesn't always work. It's failed every time they've tested it. So we've got a lot of challenges in the states, and we're continuing to fight on those fronts while we continue to try to make progress where we can on Capitol Hill. But we think a lot of that here in D.C. will be done through executive action, will be done through orders. And while we'd love to see changes in law, the reality is that we have a very narrow split in Congress. I mean, with 53 senators on the Republican side who are supportive of gun ownership, that's not knocking on the door of filibuster proof. That's, as my boss likes to say, that's standing at the end of the driveway. So we still have a ways to go. There are people who really don't like the idea of suppressors coming off the NFA who could just filibuster those bills and kill them. So we have to find ground where we can and continue to work with those people across the aisle. But there are a few here and there that we can still find agreement with, and we're trying to make sure we do those things that we can. But otherwise, I think we're looking through a lot of executive action through the White House.
That seems to be my initial reading into how they're going to make changes, because you're right, the landscape in Congress is challenging even with pro-gun majorities. And there is an appetite, of course, from the executive branch to change things. So we'll see how that all plays out. There, Mark, everyone should go to nssf.org, follow social media. Is that the best way people can learn about NSSF and what you guys are working on?
Yeah, go to nssf.org. If you click onto that media tab, you can always follow whatever blogs and press releases that we're posting up. We're trying to furiously keep the press releases out of the bills that we're supporting, make sure people understand them. And you can always sign up for that news too. There's a enroll I've met before down at the bottom to receive those communications.
Weekly updates. Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, I encourage, or you can find us on any of the socials, and they're always putting stuff up there as well.
Awesome. As always, Mark, thank you. You're a wealth of knowledge. I appreciate you coming on to tell us what's happening on the firearms front and conservation front. And I hope we can do this again very soon if you have more positive updates for my listeners.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it, Gabriella. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this installment of District of Conservation, I would love to know your feedback. Send it my way. Please be sure to leave us reviews on Apple, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are played, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to never miss a beat nor a guest announcement. Thanks so much for listening to District of Conservation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please share the podcast to those who may be interested in learning more about these critical natural resources, environment, energy issues.